Amen. So we're going to take a piece of what I spoke on last time. With the appointed times, now that we've entered into those appointed times, we are right here. We are here.
Yeah.
Now, we get to experience an appointed time every single week, right? Because the Shabbat is a recurring appointment. It's an occurring date night with Yahweh, right? It's a time that we can look forward to. It's a time that he says that he will provide for us, that we don't have to provide for ourselves. Yes. And then there's something special that he does with the Sabbath, because he takes it and he extends it in certain areas, you know, and just takes it and applies that principle at times beyond just on that weekly occasion. And so we went through all of those, and the appointed times being Passover, unleavened bread, first fruit, Shavuot, Day of Trumpets, or Yom Teruah, Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur, and then the Sabbath of appointed times being Tabernacles, Sukkot, and that being the seventh, and also in the seventh month, representing the Shabbat of Shabbats, right? The Sabbath of Sabbaths. So with that, we went through everything as it relates to the feast days and how they relate to the days of creation. And just a quick look back on that, we have day one, light, divided light from darkness. Day two, he separated waters from waters, created an expanse. In day three, he created and brought forth dry land, which then brought forth vegetation. The fourth day, he created the stars, the sun, the moon, for seasons and for times. Notice that the first day, in the first day, there was light divided from darkness, but in the fourth day, there was sun, moon, and stars created for seasons and for times. And so there's a difference in that light, right? There's a difference in the light that we see taking place in the fourth day, because that light was not created when he said, let light come to be, as in separating light from the darkness in day one. Day five, fish and birds created. Day six, man, beasts, and creeping creatures, as well as livestock. And then day six, created rest and reflection, in that he set the Sabbath apart. We talked about how that is now inseparable from creation itself. That regardless of man's tradition, there is no way, nothing, unless you can make a planet, make an earth, make a solar system, make a sun, make a universe, make a galaxy, then we have no right to do anything with changing what's been created. And the Sabbath was a part, embedded in creation itself. And so in that, we are now at the time of Passover. Hallelujah. We are at the time of Passover. And so as we know, we want to try to be in line with Yahweh's word and what he tells us to do. And so in that, we keep his feast. This is what we do. We keep his feast. And so this being the first, I wanted to look at a couple things in here, because on the first day, he divided dark from light. He created clarity from obscurity. He created the holy and separated that from the profane. He created that which is right and separated that from the wrong. This is the light that will be the light of man, and the very light that he spoke of at the end, where he says there will again be no need for the sun and the moon, because Yahweh will be the light of man. And so we will not need the light that he created in the fourth day, because truth be told, the light he created in the fourth day was for us to keep track of time. So once you enter into eternity, what do you not have to do anymore? Keep track of time. And so this is what it's meant when he says you will enter into a Shabbat, a Sabbath, that will have no end. This is an everlasting Sabbath. I don't know about y'all, but I don't want to get trapped in any other day. I don't want to get trapped in any other day. Every other day represents the curse that he placed on man. For he says, by the sweat of your brow will you work, and will you till the ground and bring forth, and when you do, it will bring forth thorns and thistles. And women in childbearing, you will have pain. All of these things happening as a result of the fall. But he says one day a week on the Sabbath day, he says you do no work. Some people say, oh, that's a curse, I can't work. But what he's saying is you do not have to work. That might have been a better way to get across to some of us, where it's like, oh, that's not such a bad thing, right? You don't have to. Guess what? You're no longer under the curse. This is what he's saying. You're no longer under that curse. So I don't want to get trapped in any other day. Any other day that's going to enter into eternity, seventh day is it. Sabbath is it. First day, it's a work day. Second day, third day, fourth day, all of them work days. That's right. But the seventh day, he says, we will restore and return you back to your former glory.
Thank you, Father. Yeah.
And so here at the Passover, we began 2 weeks ago by noticing that there was a new moon. And in noticing that there's a new moon, then we can say from this day forward, we will count to the 14th day. And of course, not being this evening, but tomorrow evening, entering into that time. This is the 13th, the 13th day of the new moon. And so what we see is Yeshua being that perfect sacrifice.
Yes.
Because what did he tell the children of Israel to do? Put the blood of a lamb on the doorpost of your homes. And what does he say he will do as a result of that? I will pass over you. I will pass over you. We see Yeshua as being that perfect sacrifice. He was without sin. He also was the lamb, right? He was also we were to take in all of him, right? All of his word is what we take in, all of him. He says, take and eat, right? And then he also, they said that you break none of its bones, the lamb. And the same thing with Yeshua. We were to break none of the Passover lamb's bones. And you also have here with Yeshua that they came to him to break his bones. They broke the two on either side of him, and they got to him, and they did not have to. They did not have to break his bones. So all of these things begin to come true. So we know and see that this is prophecy, right? This is such great prophecy that Yahweh has given us, this beautiful thing, this time of celebration that we can celebrate. And for years, for a long time, they had no real idea. All they knew was, I've been freed. Our parents were freed from bondage. Our forefathers were freed from bondage. We're celebrating because they're being freed. But guess what? He was prophesying of a time that those who did not come out of Egypt would also be what? Free from bondage. From what bondage? From the bondage of sin and death. Hallelujah. That's the bondage that we're free from. So my question is this: how can we then complete this process of being free from bondage, from the bondage of sin if we do not complete the process of the Passover. Because the question is, and a lot of people want to say, okay, well, this is not unto salvation. Well, if you were born during the time that they had to put the blood of the lamb over their physical home, then it was a matter of life and death. That is salvation.
Yes, it is.
If you were obedient, you were saved. If you were disobedient, you were not saved. Period. End of story. Obedience. And so how do we know that there will not come a time where Yahweh will say, if you have been obedient, then you will be saved? Do we want to take that chance? Here's what I can fully expect. I can fully expect that we are getting it wrong. Is it okay for me to admit that, y'all? We ain't got it right. We ain't got it perfect. Well, I promise you, we don't have it perfect. But here's what I can promise you. Y'all know I love my little examples, and I try to use the same ones, so y'all gonna remember these things. Y'all gonna think of them when somebody says something. You're gonna be like, yeah, it's a good time to use that saying. Just give me credit for it, okay? At least the first two times. At least the first two times. If you say it enough, then you can kind of take it on. But if I tell my son to do what? Make his bed. Yes. Should be listening. If I tell my son to make his bed, he goes upstairs and he says, Dad, I cleaned your room. I'm going to say, great, son, I appreciate it. Now go make up your bed. And I can keep going through those examples, but here's the thing. What would I do if I went upstairs and I see that his bed is made, but it's not perfect? How would I feel? Would I feel the same way when he says, hey, I cleaned your room up? No. I'm going to look, and first thing I'm going to say is, he was obedient. He did what I asked him to do. And then what am I going to do? Come here, son. Great job. I appreciate your effort. Let me show you what you need to do. Do this. Do this. A time's coming, y'all. This is why we don't have to get it perfect right now. We're going to do our darndest to get it right. But guess what? We don't have to get hung up on, well, this one does it this way, this one does it that way, and this one does it this way. Guess what, guys? If we're all trying, there are going to be times where we get to a point where we say, you know what? I had this wrong. Let me correct it. You know what? I was trying it this way and it wasn't quite working. Let me correct it. There's going to come a day where he's going to come and say, come on, let me show you how it's done. That's right. He already did that once. He's going to do it again. He came, and in revealing to us, there were certain things, y'all, something as simple as his taught ones walking through the field and picking wheat. They suddenly now we know that Shabbat is not this little box that they created where you can't do this, can't do that, can't walk too fast, can't jog, you can't, if you sing too hard, then you're working your vocal cords. And if you, come on, you're doing too much to try to make Yahweh's law something that it's not. And then what do people do? And they still do it to this day. They come to you and say, you can't do all of that. It's too hard. Why? Because man has lumped all of this stuff on it. Man, not Yahweh. But what did Yeshua do? He came and he did what? Walked it out in front of us. So now we know, okay, so this is what we're supposed to be thinking of when he says to keep and guard the Shabbat. Not what they were showing us, but what Yeshua gave us. He didn't undo the Torah. He explained it. He didn't get rid of it. He highlighted. He made it greater.
That's right.
It's even bigger now. And so think about this. Think about this. If we have a tradition, right? A tradition that most of us are familiar with, and one that has been passed down through the generations now, officially became a part of the church liturgy and their practices and customs at least since the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, and that's Easter. We're all familiar with that. I was sitting and thinking through this thing, and what hit me was, and I really had to go back and try to think through this, and I'm like, this is, wow, mind-blowing. But think if Yeshua never completed his work, what the result would be. If he never completed, what the result would be. This is what I mean. What does Easter represent? Let's not take it from the true history. Let's take it from the people who on Sunday are going to go to church and they're going to celebrate Easter. What is it? What does it represent? Resurrection, right? What do they say? Resurrection Sunday, right? Okay, perfect. Now, if there's no death, how can there be a resurrection? Right. What does Yahweh's plan represent? So let's look at this thing. We have Passover. What happened? He died. Unleavened bread, what happens? He was taken off the stake before unleavened bread came in so that he would be in the belly of the ground when unleavened bread began. Unleavened bread marked his time of his burial. Now, here's where I want to pause. This is what's so important, because what tradition has given us is only a part of the story. Because the thing that the traditional church says represents his death is what? Communion. And when do you do communion? As often as you want. As often as your establishment says we're going to do it, that's when you do it. Now, if that represents his death, then how do we connect his death to his burial and his burial to his rising, to his resurrection? Because at this point, we've got communion and Easter, and most people are going to do communion on Easter, which means there's no time for him to die, be buried, and resurrect, right? But what does Yahweh put in place in his appointed times? Passover, he died. Unleavened bread, he was placed into the ground. Pause right there. How significant is the removing of leaven? Vital, extremely important. Why is the removing of leaven so important with this feast and this strand of gatherings? What makes that so important? Because leaven represents sin. So what is he showing us? So let's do it according to Yahweh, and then we'll look at it from man's tradition. If we do it according, matter of fact, I'm going to reverse that. I'm going to reverse it. If we do it according to man's tradition, we celebrate his death as often as we want to during communion, which means we can't necessarily line that up with when he actually died, right? Because you're doing it as often as you want to. So this commemoration just kind of comes as you want. Now, what's next is his resurrection. So what have we skipped? We've skipped the burial. What's so important about removing leaven? What if Yeshua simply died? What do we gain? If we go according to man's tradition, what have we gained simply from his death? I'll tell you. Let's go back. What happened when they killed that lamb during Passover and they put blood on the doorpost? What happened? What was the result? What did they gain?
Firstborn.
The life of their firstborn.
That's right.
Boom. That's it. So if Yeshua simply dies, he spares your life, but guess where you remain? In your sin, and where else? in bondage.
That's right.
Because you don't leave Mitzrayim. We remain in sin. And we remain in bondage. The only thing that death alone accomplished literally was the saving of the firstborn. And how many of those are in every house? So literally, the whole house, one person, and maybe the dad is the firstborn, and the mom is the firstborn, and there's a firstborn child from there. At most 3 in one house. Everything past that is not a firstborn. So at most, 3 lives are saved. And back then they wasn't having 2 or 3. What they say, 2.5. And the half is a dog or something in a white picket fence. So that is not, if that's not the case, then you got 6, 7, 8 children, right? And these 6, 7, or 8, there's only one firstborn. At most, the result is that they get to stay in Egypt and experience their big brother or big sister or their mom or their dad. That's it. Now, is that a little thing? No. That's pretty important. It's pretty important. But is that the complete work of Messiah? It's not the complete work. So let's look at it the way that Yeshua, that Yahweh, played this thing out. Day 1, Passover. He died. Then what comes next? Immediately, you go into unleavened bread. When you're doing what? Removing leaven. You're without leaven now. If you're without leaven, what is that saying? Y'all, I'm going to bring it in. I'm going to bring it home. Look. Why did they need to get Yeshua off the stake?
So it went to follow the land.
Because the feast was coming in, the Sabbath was coming in. What were they doing? Removing what? Leaven. Yeshua is taking away the sin.
Yeah.
So not only did he die, but right after he died, now it's time to remove the sin. So this is his work. This is what he's doing now. He has died. That part when he says, I have given, it is finished. He's done. And the scripture says he gave up the ghost.
Yeah.
It was done. That part. But at that point, all he's done is died. If all we've got is that far, then the sin has not been removed.
That's right.
But what did they say? We must get him down.
That's right.
What do we say about the leaven? We must clean the leaven out of our houses. By the time the sun, we must be finished, and everything must be out of the house. The leaven, the sin, must be removed. So it was almost like Yeshua was a magnet to all of the sin. And at this point, the sin is attached to him. And they say now they must get him down. What are they doing? They're removing the leaven. Because they're now entering into unleavened bread. During which time, he is now in the earth. He is now in the belly of the earth. Now, what happens if Yeshua dies and is buried? Okay, so your firstborn, we know we see what happened with Passover, with the Passover that happened. So they firstborn was saved, right? And this burial, we know there came a time that they were going through. Remember, they were escaping and they were running, and they came to the Sea of Reeds. They entered into what? The Sea of Reeds. What does the scripture refer to being covered in water? As a death. As a death, because you're dying and being buried, right? And that burial now, you are covered, completely covered. They were, again, I showed y'all the example of how tall those waters would have been. And they would have been as tall as walking in between two skyscrapers. Today, the tallest building we have in Dubai, India, it would be like walking between two of those. And that's how much water would have been on either side. And the scripture says that this time, were they not all baptized, right? Or mikvahed during that time. So as they're walking now through this watery grave, they are during this time of unleavened bread during these first couple of days. And now on this third day, what happens? They come out of the other side, life. Life comes out just as life came forth from the dry ground on the third day of creation. But here's what's happening. What happens with Yeshua on the third day? He rises. So what happens if all we have is death and burial? What did the scripture say about Pharaoh and his army? That they were drowned in the sea. It says his army, they were there in the bottom of the sea. And so if there is no resurrection, then what is there now? No life. So you have saved the firstborn. You have removed the sin. Who does that save? Everybody, right? Everyone, because removing of sin. And so now that we die, sin removed, a resurrection can take place. And when that resurrection takes place, now there is what? Life. There's first fruits. There is first fruit, because now life comes forth from that earth. And so if we simply focus on death without understanding that death has to be followed by removing of sin, or if we jump straight to resurrection, what's so important? Why is it such a big deal? Because before Easter, there's no death. Before Easter, there's no removing of sin. There's only resurrection. I think Yahweh has a better plan. I think the way that Yahweh designed this thing, that it is absolutely, infallibly perfect. That he has given us a perfect system, that we don't just simply, our Messiah doesn't just die. But he dies, he clears out the leaven and is buried. And he comes forth as new life, and he's resurrected. And who rises with him? We do. We do. And this is how we are then with him. So my prayer is that as we go into this time of Passover, that we remember we can't stop at the death. We have to address the sin. If we don't address the sin, then we might as well go do Easter, y'all. Just cut to the chase. But it's the removing of the sin. And we don't want to just stay dead, sinless. We don't want to just stay dead, sinless. We now want to live. And that brings forth new life. So I believe Yeshua, in the three facets, his death on Passover, his burial on unleavened bread, and his resurrection on first fruits, has given us the absolute perfect and complete work. Amen. Amen.